Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, the sage, the all-knowing Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher of irishbreakdown.com. And we are going to dive right into some recruiting today, Brian, because last time I checked my watch, and I, of course, had to check it again because it said we were going live, but it's June. And June has been the month that has been circled for, a year and a half at this point to try to get recruits on campus. And we know for a fact that there have been recruits on campus since yesterday. This is a huge month for Notre Dame, and it is not a normal June for Notre Dame. So so people understand what June is normally like for Notre Dame. Yes, there's official visits and there's camps that usually go on, and June is kind of the big month in the summertime for recruiting because July is a dead period, and all the camps happen in June. Like football is crazy camp-wise at Notre Dame and across the country in June. But this June, it is the first month that have allowed recruits on campus since March of 2020? Does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the last time Notre Dame had kids on campus was back in February, like late February, early March of 2020.
That is crazy. And so this June is going to affect not only the 22 class, but the 23 class. I mean, you name it, June is crazy.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, Vince, to me, I think this is an incredibly important month for Notre Dame from an even bigger picture standpoint.
Okay.
And that is, I'm rocking the Gap Closers hoodie today. I got that in yesterday. I had the T-shirt on yesterday. The microphone kind of beautifully covers up the IB, which I don't necessarily love. So I got to make up for it up here, So got to get that product placement going correctly. But when you look at it, Vince, it's not just about, hey, they haven't had kids on campus for a while and all those kind of things. You have to look at who's coming on campus. Yes. You have to look at where the class is right now. Well, yesterday, SI All-American ranked Notre Dame's class 4th. The reason that's important is because SI All-American is, in my opinion, the most subjective ranking. It's not just point-based. It's not just built around who has the most commitments and those types of things.
And it's not just because we're a part of the SI network either.
Right.
That's not who you are. You don't just tout.
And I don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
They asked me to do a write-up on, who I thought, what I thought about Notre Dame's class so that they could use, but I had no say in where the ranking was.
Right.
So it's 4th in 24/7 sports. It's 4th in Rivals. And the thing that I wrote about this weekend was we've been here before with Notre Dame. We've been here where they've been ranked high. I think they were ranked like 1st going into the, they would about this time a year ago because they had such a big class. The difference now between past years is number one, unlike past years, Notre Dame is not in a situation where the majority of their top players are already in the board. And I went back and looked at the last 3 years, and I think in the past 3 seasons, at least 70 to 75% of Notre Dame's top-ranked players were already in the class by June 1st. That's not going to be the case if Notre Dame has a good June. And I think that's the difference. And you look at the kids that have come on campus in past years, and you look at who the top prospects were. Notre Dame is in a unique situation now that I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and I said, hey, if Notre Dame landed this class, and this is the class I came up with just to make the point, if Notre Dame added to the 13 that they already had, C.J. Williams, Tobias Merriweather, Jake Taylor, Carson Hensman, Billy Schrouth on the offensive line, Anthony Lucas and Cyrus Moss on the defensive line, Jalen Sneed and Junior Tuihalamaka at linebacker, Devin Moore, Benjamin Morrison at cornerback, and Sherrod Colville at safety, maybe Xavier Nwankpa at safety. Where's that class rank? He goes, man, I think that class might be battling for the number 1 spot. Well, I thought it'd be more number 2, number 3. And the point that I made to him is every single one of those players that I just mentioned are visiting in June.
Yeah.
And I didn't even talk about Zach Rice, who's a 5-star offensive lineman. I didn't even have some of the, I didn't even talk about Xavier Bradshaw, who, obviously I'm extremely high on. I mean, there's a lot of things that there's a lot of players I could have gone crazy with and said, hey, what about, they're going to get this guy and that guy and potentially this. Look, would that be a hard class to get? Sure. But when they're all visiting, it's kind of like, okay, Well,
Right.
you got a puncher's chance, right? And so that's why I
Absolutely.
say this is such an important month, Vince, because if Notre Dame is going to close the gap, and that's why we came up with this, right? The gap closers is there are at least 10 gap closers, at least 10 gap closers that Notre Dame is going to host in June, at least 10. And if Notre Dame can have a special haul, they're going to finish with a top 2 to 3 class. But the thing about it is they don't need to have that good of a finish in June to actually finish with a top 5 class, a class that significantly closes the gap between those other schools. And that's what you look at and say, it's they have a legitimate opportunity, even if they don't bat 1,000, even if they don't bat 900, that if they have a great June, this is going to be the class that at the end of the day says this is the class that gets Notre Dame over the hump. They've had some really strong hauls in past years, great offensive haul last year with a couple really good defensive players, great offensive haul in 2020 with a couple good defensive players. This class has a chance to have outstanding players on both. But it's going to require for Notre Dame to have a great month of June. And that's why I say this is the biggest class, the most important class. And the fact that you say what's different now between past years, it's not just that there are so many top-ranked players still on the board. There are so many top-ranked players that have legitimate interest where you could argue that Notre Dame is in the top 4 or 5 for every single one of those kids I mentioned, if not higher, top 3 for a lot of those kids. This is the kind of situation where that is true, but what is also true is Notre Dame has never had the string of success on the field that it can now pitch kids.
Right. In the past 3 years,
look, man, we've been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years.
Sustained success,
And now you're literally the difference between this and that is much easier to sell now.
Sure.
Because, hey, we've been there. We lost, we beat Clemson last year. Yeah, we lost Alabama, but we held them to a season low in points and we lost by 17. And, hey, you're the kind of guy we need to get over that hump. Don't go to Alabama and do what's already been done. Come here and do something special.
Be immortal.
You can't do that when you're 10-3 and 9-4 and all those other kind of things. But when you've been in the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, you've had undefeated regular seasons 2 of the last 3 years, and your down year was 11-2. You've got something to sell that Notre Dame has never had under Brian Kelly. And, yeah, they had the 2012 season. Well, guess what followed that 2012 season?
Right.
Notre Dame's best recruiting class of the Brian Kelly tenure, right? What followed that strong finish to 2011? You got Ishaq Williams, Stephon Tuitt back in the class. You got Aaron Lynch. I mean, you had a great finish, right? We've seen it over and over and over again. When Notre Dame has success in the field, it bumps recruiting. Well, now you've had a string of success on the field.
Right.
And that's why you're, seeing all these kids visit. That's the reason so many of these kids are coming on campus. You've also had situations where because they haven't been able to visit all these other campuses, there's more of an even playing field now.
Sure.
And I think that helps Notre Dame as well. So all those things to me play together to put Notre Dame into a situation where, Vince, this could be this is the class to do it. And then the final piece, and we'll get into this later, is there's a lot of game changers. There's a lot of gap closers coming on campus from the 2023 class as well. So that's what's this stretch of 30 days I think is in June. 30 days in June.
Nailed it.
This stretch of 30 days is ultimately going to be the thing that determines whether Notre Dame is going to continue to be what they've been, or whether they're going to take the next step as a program.
Okay, let me ask you a couple questions based on what you just said. Number one, is July still a dead period for this year, or did they change it because of basically a dead year and a half?
I don't know. I think it's still I still think it's not going to – I don't think they're going to have official visits in July.
Okay.
I've seen 0 kids schedule official visits. Now, I don't know if it's going to be dead or quiet. That's what I don't know.
Okay.
And the difference is quiet means kids can kind of come on their own dime. You can you can see kids. You just dead period means no contact.
No contact at all.
No officials, no unofficials, nothing. Kids can come on campus if they want, but you can't bump into them.
And that's why coaches go on vacation in July, because it's a dead period. I mean, it just is what it is.
And it should still be a dead period. I mean, the season starts in August. It's the last chance for a lot of these coaches to kind of spend time with their families. Also to start focusing on your own team. Sure. I think those things are true. I would prefer that it be more of a quiet period. Maybe you can host some kids unofficially, maybe through the first couple weeks of July. But, I mean, there's going to be a need for them to, at some point in time, to shut it down and say, hey, look, it's time to focus on our team.
And can you explain to some of our newbies what your definition of a gap closer is? Because you said there's going to be 8 to 10 gap closers on campus, and you mentioned it obviously.
Off the top of my head, yeah. I mean,
but explain your definition of what that is and why it's so.
When
important.
I was referring to the 8 to 10, I'm referring to the ultimate definition of a gap closer, which is essentially a guy that is on the level of the players you've been chasing. So it's not that there's two types of gap closers. The ultimate gap closer is the one where you talk about this is the top level player. This is the guy that goes to Bama. This is the guy that goes to Clemson. This is the guy that goes to Ohio State that Notre Dame just hasn't been getting a lot of. It's the Jason Adamiolas. It's the Kyle Hamiltons. It's the Michael Mayers. It's the Chris Tyrees. It's those kind of players, right? It's the Blake Fishers, the Tyler Buckners.
Right.
Okay. Notre Dame's been getting a few more of those in the last few years. And so when I look at it, I look at, I think all three of the running backs are that kind of guy.
Okay.
I think Tobias Merriweather is that kind of player. And these are just kids that are going to be on campus. CJ Williams is that kind of player. I think that I kind of lump the offensive linemen as a group, because their line's different. But I think Billy Shrouth is that kind of player. I think Carson Hensman is that kind of player. I think Jake Taylor's that kind of player. I think Zach Rice is that kind of player. But I put those into one. Anthony Lucas is that kind of player. Cyrus Moss is that kind of player. Jalen Snead is that kind of player. And Junior Tuihalamaka is that kind of player. And to me, Xavier Nwankpa is that kind of player. The ultimate gap closer. Like that's the guy that Alabama's offered a lot of those dudes, and they're pursuing a lot of those dudes. The other type of gap closer is maybe they're not the Kyle Hamiltons, but they're better than what you've had. Okay. And they close the gap. Like so maybe they don't ultimately. Maybe a better way to say it is the first group of players, those are more gap erasers, right? Like, I mean, they are on that level. They bring you a long way. Then there's the other type of gap closers, which are also very, very important. And you need to add those two together into a class, which is, maybe this isn't an elite future first or second round draft pick, but this is a really good football player. This is a Troy Pride kind of guy. This is a guy that maybe isn't a Chase Claypool type of player, but he's a guy that's going to make you better than what you were. Okay. And that also closes the gap. One is more incremental. One is like a giant leap forward. And the difference between this year and past years is there's a lot of those giant leap forward guys that are going to be on campus. And to me, if you can close on those guys, I mean, if Notre Dame bats 500 with the list that I just gave you, they're going to have a bona fide top 8 class. If anything beyond batting 500 with that group, all of a sudden now Notre Dame's fighting to be in the top 5.
Yeah, I got
That's
you.
what I look at it. But
again,
they're all already scheduled for visits in June, right? That's the thing is these aren't just guys Notre Dame has offered that they're trying to have a shot with. These are kids that have said, hey, I got 5 officials. I'm taking one of them to Notre Dame. Yeah. These aren't unofficial visitors. They're one of 10 visits they're going to take, right? Which sometimes is what we see in the summer.
Sure.
Sometimes during the summer, it's, hey, I'm just doing a Midwestern tour, so I'm going to Ohio State.
They go with their AAU or their 7-on-7 team.
These are kids that are these are official visits. They're going to be coming with their parents or their coach or whatever else, to where they are viewing Notre Dame as a legitimate possibility to be on campus. Yeah. Now, some of those guys, Notre Dame's going to have to fight to make sure they don't commit schools before they visit Notre Dame. That's going to be a concern. I have that concern with Xavier Nwankpa, for example. But this is a tremendous opportunity for Notre Dame to make, like they've been slowly chipping away at it for years, Vince, right? Just slowly chipping away.
I agree.
Getting a Chris Tyree here, getting a Michael Mayer there. This is the class where you can just take a big, giant freaking sledgehammer to that wall that's between you and those other programs. And maybe you don't knock it down completely this offseason, but, it's going to take a big chunk out of it. And then if you have the success with 2023, then you have that opportunity in 2023 to completely knock it down. Because when you look at what they've done in the last 2 classes with, you look at Chris Tyree, you look at Michael Mayer, you look at Tosh Baker, you look at Blake Fisher, Rocco Spindler, Lorenzo Stiles, Deion Colsey, guys, Tyler Buckner, on offense, defensively, there haven't been quite as many. Well, this class already is off to a great start. With the gap. I mean, they've already got commitments from, in my opinion, at least 3 gap closers in this class. And I'm being generous. I mean, I look at Josh Burnham, Tyson Ford, in my opinion, and Aiden Guevara. I think that Darren Agu, from an upside standpoint, is a gap closer type of recruit. I think Nolan Ziegler, from an upside standpoint, can be that. Jaden Mickey is the other form of gap closer where, he's not a guy that necessarily – he's not Patrick Surtain, but he's makes your group even stronger, makes you even better there. And that's what you're looking for. But this month of June is going to determine whether Notre Dame has a class on par with 2021, which was a good class, a number 8, number 9 class, right? One of the better than Brian Kelly.
Yeah, right.
Or is this a class that you say that class right there is going to be the cornerstone of Notre Dame winning a championship?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So you've laid the groundwork for what is going to happen as far as who's coming and things of that nature. What needs to happen, though? Like, in your opinion, what does Notre Dame need to do to make this a successful June, right? So we can go position by position if you want. I know I've heard you talk a lot about the linebacking core. There's a lot of good ones that are going to be on campus. Maybe we can start there. What needs to happen for Notre Dame?
First, I want to begin by thanking Patrick for the super chat. I appreciate that very, very, very much, Patrick. I know that you're a loyal listener to our show, so I appreciate that very much. But to me, linebacker is the class where this thing has to start for me, because what makes linebacker a little bit different from some other position groups that we're going to discuss is not just does Notre Dame have the potential players to have an elite linebacker class. It's also arguably the most important class on defense from you have to meet it from a numbers and impact standpoint because of past recruiting misses.
Sure.
And so to me, that's where I look at it and say, it's that double. You have an opportunity for an elite class, and you should always shoot for an elite class. I mean, that's always should be the goal, whether you also signed an elite class last year or not at your position. That should always be the goal. I mean, when I recruited, you asked Brian Kelly, you asked Tommy Rees, you asked Mike Elson, you asked Marcus Freeman, any coach, hey, my goal is to get better players this year than I got last year.
Sure.
And then my goal will be next year to get better players next year than I got this year. I mean, that's the overall goal. But specifically to linebacker, it's a really, really strong linebacker year. And Notre Dame got off to a great start with Nolan Ziegler, getting him very early. Mm-hmm. But then Marcus Freeman comes along. He gets Josh Burnham, who they would not have got, if we're being honest, had it not been for Marcus Freeman being hired. They offer Jalen Sneed. They offer Junior Tuihalamaka. And guys that were not on the board when the day that Marcus Freeman was hired, they were not on the board.
Right.
Those, to me, are 3 top 100 players at that position. And they are all 3 completely different types of players. And so you have this opportunity to where not only is it a great linebacker year nationally, but you have an opportunity to get 3 of the very best from a ranking standpoint. And then another guy, Nolan Ziegler, who has the upside of being that kind of player. He kind of transitions from safety down to linebacker. And I've seen some clips of him playing lacrosse this spring, and he's gotten bigger, he's gotten faster, he's gotten quicker, and he's playing lacrosse like a linebacker. But he's very skilled as well, you know, of what little I know about lacrosse. But so you look at it and you say, they're at a position now, Vince, where if they close on Jalen Sneed and Junior Tuihalamaka, and right now, if I had to do a prediction, I would say, yes, I feel very good about that happening. Mm-hmm. You're now turning away Sebastian Cheeks. And there's a reason that you're starting to see a lot of crystal balls for Sebastian Cheeks to Texas. And that's because there's not a lot of room left at the end.
Room. Can I add something to this too, Brian? Because I guess a third reason that linebacker is so important, I feel like that position group is extremely important to Marcus Freeman's defense.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And to get an elite group there is only going to make this defense better because I feel like everything kind of works around what the linebackers are, right? Yeah. And so you get an elite group there, it's just going to make everybody else around them even better. So even a third reason that this is such an important class. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's a great point, Vince, because we've talked about this. This is more of a linebacker-driven defense than it was before. I mean, you could kind of plug in some, smart, heady type of players in the linebacker, and it was schemed in a way, and the defensive line was used in a way where the linebackers are going to be impactful. If you can get elite linebackers in this particular style of defense, it's going to be more of a game changer type of situation.
Right.
And yes, absolutely. You nailed it. It's even more reason why it's important to do that, because if you can put if you look at the production that Cincinnati had at their linebacker position last year, they had more tackles for loss than Notre Dame's linebackers, and Notre Dame had a unanimous All-American at linebacker last year. Right. And they played on a per-game basis. And so imagine what you could do with elite talent running that defense, and that's the whole point. That's, Yeah, you can scheme your way into things, but why not scheme your way into things with elite players? And that's what Marcus Freeman's doing. And so that right there is to me where it all begins in regards to they have to be more willing to go after these guys. Marcus Freeman has done that, and he's put them in position to really, really knock it out. And you've already got a great defensive end haul, right? Now you got to add to the defensive tackle class to it. But to have great defensive ends and great linebackers,
right?
That's arguably the two most important positions in this defense is those two positions.
And because of positional flexibility too, right? I mean, those defensive ends, you can drop them, you can put them at linebacker. I mean, there's so many different things, and we've talked about the different ways that you can use those defensive ends. So having, great talent at linebacker and defensive end, yeah, that is really exciting. Mm-hmm. That is really exciting. So let's move on to the next thing, Brian. Secondary is an area where Notre Dame fans are, I guess, nervous about this year.
Sure.
Because everybody's young, right? And there's a ton of talent. You and I have talked about it a million times. There's a ton of talent there, but it's young talent. And so I will always look for a lockdown corner, and building up the safety depth obviously is going to be very important in this class. What does the secondary class potentially look like as far as who's going to be on campus and what Notre Dame needs to do? Let's
start off at corner. And corner's a unique situation because that's just a position that right now, Vince, Notre Dame has not been able to have a lot of success getting the elite recruits. Or even necessarily the high upside potential could develop into a first-round guy like we've seen at defensive end. It's just been a struggle for him. And I don't know if that's going to change until they can produce a high draft pick at that position. And obviously I don't think that's going to happen in 2022 draft because I don't think Notre Dame's going to have any guys go in the NFL after this draft class. But I think when you look at the cornerback position, it's about if you're not going to be able to land that elite prospect, then every year you have to get good numbers of high ceiling players.
Sure.
You did that in 2021. You got Ryan Barnes, who I'm very high on. You got Phillip Riley. You got JoJo Johnson. You got Chance Tucker.
Yeah, it's a good class.
The hope is out of that, one becomes a star, one becomes a really good starter, and the other two are good quality depth players that battle for playing time in whatever order. It doesn't matter which one. It's just you hope that one of them can do that. That's the goal. But in order to do that and in order to increase the odds that can happen, you have to add pretty good numbers and similar players every year. You can't just bring in one cornerback. So you look at this situation where Notre Dame's looking for another 2 to 3 man cornerback class. Well, you need similar players, and those guys are obviously Jaden Mickey's already in the class. That's a great start. Jaden Mickey graded out as a top 250 player by me based on his sophomore film, and then he comes out in the spring during his junior season and takes a big jump to where now I grade him out as a top 150 caliber player. So he's a great place to start. But you've got Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison both on campus on June 11th through the 13th for their official visits. That is a huge, huge weekend for Notre Dame in many regards, but especially the secondary because those are the top two targets of corner. And Benjamin Morrison's a kid that I really feel good. Notre Dame's in a great position with him. You just got to close it during the visit. Devin Moore, I felt really good about 2 weeks ago. I'm a little less confident in now because Florida and Alabama are making such a hard push for him, which, again, speaks to his volume. So you can either say, well, rivals in 247 think he's a 3-star, or you can say Florida, Alabama, Notre Dame are all pushing hard for this kid. Which one do you want to believe, right?
Right, exactly.
This kid's a flipping good football player. And so you've got Florida. He's on campus today at Florida. He's going to be on campus, I believe, the 5th at Alabama for unofficial visits. Those schools are trying to convince him to wait until the fall to make a decision and to take official visits to their schools. Notre Dame's trying to get him to decide now. So whoever wins that battle is going to determine whether or not Notre Dame's going to have how good a chance Notre Dame's going to have. If he carries it into the fall, I'm not feeling good about Notre Dame's chances because that tells me those are two schools he's very intrigued by.
Well, what if he commits and then those two schools are still after him? Do you feel solid about that commitment then?
I don't think he'd commit unless he was solid.
Okay.
Because the way that Notre Dame handles things and what little I know about Devin Moore is if he commits based on the premises that Notre Dame is going to put onto him for committing publicly, because we're talking about a public commitment here, right?
Of course, yes.
Because Notre Dame tells kids if you're going to commit publicly, that means you're done. It means there's no visits, you're done. You know, I mean, we're committing to you. We're going to not take another corner at your, you know, we're going to not take someone else to fill that spot because you've committed to us. So we're going to cancel some visits we have coming up the rest of the month. You got to make the same commitment to us. And if you don't want to do that, that's cool. We'll keep recruiting you, but you're not going to go public with a commitment.
Yeah.
And so if he goes public with a commitment, I'll feel good about it. Will I be 100% certain? There's not a single kid that I'm 100% certain on. I mean, I never would have dreamed in a million years that Pete Werner would have decommitted from Notre Dame and gone somewhere else. You know, we've seen kids that you're like, wow, that kid decommitted. Like, I mean, so, you know, it's never 100%.
We're still talking about teenagers.
Right. And we're also talking about teenagers whose life circumstances may change. Things may happen. There may be some breakouts for Notre Dame this year where it's like, boy, I don't know if the depth chart's so great there. I mean, all types of things could happen. That's why it's so important to get those kids into class now. So Devin Moore, Benjamin Morrison are on campus the 11th and the 13th. If Notre Dame doesn't feel like they've sealed the deal with those two, then a week later, you've got Nakai Martinez and Jaden Bellamy on campus. Now, that's where it gets a little hairy. I like Nakai Martinez. He's a good football player, but to me, he's more of what you have as opposed to closing the gap. I feel the same way Jaden Bellamy as a corner. Jaden Bellamy is more of a Ramon Henderson, Caleb Offord type, you know, high ceiling, but a kind of a low floor. I'm not sure if he's really a corner kind of thing, as opposed to those other two guys that I feel good are just high level players. So that June 11th to 13th weekend at corner is vitally important, is going to determine whether or not Notre Dame is going to be able to get a gap closing class at corner. If they don't hit a home run that weekend, then the corner class is probably going to fall a little bit short.
Yeah.
Then you look at safety. That same weekend of June 11th to 13th, Notre Dame's going to have Jake Pope on campus. Then a week later, the June 18th to 20th, they're going to have Xavier Nwankpa on campus. Then a couple days after that, so that would be Monday of that following week, you've got Sherrod Koval on campus from the 21st to the 23rd. He's a safety from Virginia. And then that following weekend, you got KJ Winston. Xavier Nwankpa is a gap eraser player.
Yeah.
The danger there is that he visits Ohio State this upcoming weekend. Ohio State's his perceived leader. Ohio State is going to push hard to get him to commit this weekend and cancel
before he even comes to Notre Dame.
Exactly. Yeah. That's my concern there. If Xavier Nwankpa comes out of this weekend's visit uncommitted and still willing to visit Notre Dame, I'm going to feel a lot better about Notre Dame's chances. And so this is really actually – the 18th to 20th shouldn't even be on your radar if you're Notre Dame just yet with Xavier Nwankpa. Your primary emphasis this week should be, dude, don't commit. If they really want you, they're going to let you commit 2 weeks later if you come to our visit, right? If they really want you,
because they're going to feel confident that you'll go to Notre Dame and not care.
Right. If they really want you, then they're not going to tell you they're running out of room because, hey, look, I don't care who we have committed to safety. We never running out of room for Xavier Nwankpa. That's the story you tell them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is a big weekend for Notre Dame. This weekend is just as important for Notre Dame with Xavier Nwankpa as the 18th to 20th, because you're not going to get to the 18th and 20th if you don't get him through this weekend uncommitted.
Right.
So that's going to be a very big challenge for Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens and Chris O'Leary, is to make sure, and I would hopefully Brian Kelly, is to make sure that Xavier Nwankpa comes out of this weekend's visit uncommitted.
So just to peek behind the curtain a little bit, he's at Ohio State, right, for the weekend. Are they texting him and calling him and or do you be like, hey man, go enjoy yourself, but we're right here waiting for you when you get done? Like, what does that look like?
I think most of the work is done beforehand.
Okay.
I would hope that Notre Dame would treat players with the same, and other schools with the same respect they expect schools to do with the kids that are on campus for them, right?
Sure.
Which is when the kid's on campus, don't be calling them. Don't be blowing up his phone. Okay. Now, does that mean you don't, leave a couple text messages, a couple reminders? Maybe you just take a picture of the Golden Dome and just send it to them or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's some little things you do, but the work needs to be done before he gets there.
Okay.
That's where it is like, hey, man, look, you go there with this mindset. Do everything you got to do at Ohio State. We want you to treat that visit like you're going to treat our visit. You give them the respect. You pay attention. You see if you can fit there and all that kind of stuff. But you don't have to make a decision that weekend. Even if you feel like this is the place for me, I get that. But come to our place. And then if you still feel like Ohio State's the place for you, then you commit to Ohio State.
And it is what it is.
Give us a chance to show you what we have to offer too.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the key. But it's not a thing where you're blowing the kid up when he's on campus. So again, maybe make a couple hints there. But, Xavier Nwankpa is a gap eraser. I think Sherrod Colville, to me, is a gap closer. That is a kid that, to me, if you watch his junior film, Vince, this kid is an absolute missile. I mean, he is one of the most punishing safeties I've seen in a long time. I mean, he's that guy. He does as a safety what Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah did as a linebacker. He takes 3-4 steps, and he's literally putting you horizontal to the ground. And it's not a surprise, and I don't care what Tommy Leonard says. I know he's going to say something in the chat, but the fact that he's from the 757 in Virginia is part of the reason he's such a baller, if we're being honest. But in all seriousness, this is a kid that Clemson wants. This is a kid that Ohio State wants.
Sure.
And that's why I kind of laugh at some of the rankings of some of these kids, because it's like, apparently Rivals knows more about this kid than, Nick Saban's staff and Dabo Sweeney's staff and Brian Kelly's staff and Ryan Day's staff, because they want this kid big time.
Sure.
Even though he's not a top 250 player. But trust me on this one, folks. This kid is a gap closer.
Yeah.
I don't care what the rankings say. The film tells me, his offer list tells me this is a gap closer. And he's a kid, Vince, that I think a visit for Notre Dame could be a huge, I knew he was going to say something. Could be a huge deal for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Right now, I think he likes Notre Dame. There's a relationship there. He's intrigued by Notre Dame, but he's the kind of kid, and this is the thing, kids from the 757, and even if you go up to the 804 up in that Richmond area, they either love Notre Dame or it's, no, I'm good. It's not for me.
There's nothing in between.
And that's why we've seen Notre Dame have some success with some of these kids. And it's just, I mean, again, I'm from there. It's hard to explain, but it's just such a different world that you're then like, no, that's not for me. Yeah. Or it's just like, oh my gosh, this is the most special, unique place I've ever been to. And I think that's what happened with Chris Tyree. That's what happened with CJ Prosise. That's what happened with Darnell Ewell. That's what happened with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And there's also a group of kids there. There's also some you're going to find some unique parental situations where maybe those kids are getting pushed towards a place like Notre Dame, not so much specifically Notre Dame, but what Notre Dame stands for, than maybe what you find in some other similar states. I think that has helped Notre Dame a lot as well. You like with Chris Tyree, you didn't have to convince Chris Tyree's parents that Notre Dame was the place for him.
Yeah,
that was there. You had to convince Chris Tyree that was the place for him.
Sure.
And but that's when I look at it, I say Sherrod Colville's a guy that is a guy that I'm looking at to say, this is a guy that I'm really curious to see how he likes it.
Sure.
And then KJ Wentz is a kid I finally got a chance to see some junior film of him. Like what I saw from him. He's not to the same level as Nwankpa and Sherrod Colville, but he's a good football player. I think he's a 4-star kid now. I just didn't have a lot of film available to him. I saw a few games of his junior year, so I feel a little better about him. But to me, he's still not to that level. But that 18th to 23rd, when you're going to have Nwankpa and Sherrod Colville on campus, that's going to be the make or break time for Notre Dame at safety in the 2022 class. If they can knock it out of the park and come out of this class when it's all said and done, now, I don't think they're going to get commitments from either one of those guys. Could they get a commitment from Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore? It's possible. Do I expect them to get a commitment from Nwankpa or Colville? No, but it's about positioning yourself to then close at some point down the road. That's going to be the key for them. So that's to me where we're at with the secondaries. A cornerback may not have the high big names, the top 50 recruits, but if they can get Ben Morrison and Devin Moore to go with Jaden Mickey, that's a gap closing class in my opinion. If you can then add Xavier Nwankpa or Sherrod Colville, or in a perfect world, both of them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, why not?
Then that is an absolute gap erasing class right there. So there's a class to be had there, but the margin for Notre Dame when it comes to secondary recruiting is very, very thin, because if you don't get a Devin Moore, if you don't get one of those two safeties, it's still a good secondary class, but you've come up a little bit short. And that's basically where we're at. And again, it's also about combining back-to-back strong years, because we didn't talk about safety last year, getting Justin Walters, but then adding Kerry G at the end was a great step in the right direction for Notre Dame. You have to be able to counter that with a second year where you get at least one gap closer type of player at safety.
Another position group that I think people are, I don't know if nervous is the right answer, just because there's
Curious.
4 out of 5 starters that are going to be, new this year. And we're starting to talk about names that we talked about during recruiting, but we haven't really talked about playing at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's been a transfer, obviously. So, always looking for that strong offensive line class. Some decent guys in the class already.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. But what does it look like with the guys coming in June, to round out this offensive line class?
Well, I think the big one is June 18th to 20th. They've got Billy Schrouth on campus.
Okay.
I think that's one that's going to go very well for Notre Dame. So that'll be one that I feel good about. I think then you kind of backtrack a week later. They got Jake Taylor coming on campus from Nevada. And here's the thing about this offensive line class. That's a position where Notre Dame has to be great every year. And that's
Absolutely.
the issue that I had with last year's class is you've got 2 studs, right? And you got, to me, a stud and a really good player the year before. But from 3 down is where the question marks have been. And that wasn't the case necessarily in past years. And this class needs to be not only good at the top, but good from 3 down. So the question you have to ask is, where are Joey Tenone and Ty Chan going to fall on this list? If Joey Tenone and Ty Chan are 1-2, it's going to be a good offensive line class. It's going to be a top 10 to 12 offensive line class. It's not going to be an elite offensive line class.
Right.
The further you bump them down your list of ranked players in this class, the better this class is going to be, which, again, has not an indictment on Joey Tenone and Ty Chan at all. They're both very, very good players. Joey Tenone is a top 200 player for me. Ty Chan has top 50 talent. Now, I've said before, I've seen all the workout videos. I don't care about that. I want to see him in pads, and we haven't seen him since his sophomore year. But the ceiling is there. He's got a very high ceiling. So Jake Taylor's a kid to me that I look at and I say that's a big one because a lot of the top players that are on the board that Notre Dame has a shot with are interior guys, including Joe Bruner from Wisconsin, who's ranked as a tackle, but I view as more of an interior guy. Jake Taylor's a tackle
to me. Yeah.
And that is the thing for me is Jake Taylor's a guy that I view as I think he can play left tackle. He's definitely a right tackle for me, but I think he can play left tackle because I think he's a bit of a waist bender, Vince, right now. But I view that as more of a technical problem as opposed to him not as opposed to him not being flexible,
not being able to. Yeah,
right. And so I think when he to me reminds me of a less technically advanced but more athletic version of Robert Hainsey at the same age. And to me, that's quite a comparison. And he's a little bit longer than Robert was coming out of high school. So he's a big one. He's down to Alabama, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. Oklahoma's considered his leader. Getting him on campus on the 11th to 13th is big. I don't know a lot of people that are predicting him to pick Notre Dame, but I'll say this. From what I know about Jake Taylor, from what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've been able to gather from sources, he strikes me as the kind of kid that's going to take to Notre Dame a little bit better than people think.
Okay.
Whereas right now it's about Oklahoma because of the relationship with the O-line coach, which is incredibly important. And, of course, Oklahoma's success producing offensive linemen. If there's any team in the country that can say, hey, look, we produce offensive lines on a yearly basis every bit as good as Notre Dame, there's really only 2, and that's Oklahoma and Alabama. I mean, that's it. Well, the advantage you have with Alabama is the coach that basically recruited him and got Notre Dame really interested in Alabama is now at Texas. That was Kurt Flood. So they've had a position change there. And so I think that helps Notre Dame against Alabama.
Sure.
And their new offensive line coach is obviously Doug Marrone. Now it's basically, to me, Oklahoma's the one I'm worried about there. And I just feel that a home run visit with Jake Taylor could be something that really pushes the needle in his recruitment. And he is a big, big, important kid because he's the one tackle left on the board that I think Notre Dame has a legitimate shot with.
Okay.
Zach Rice could end up, being blown away by his visit. Zach Rice is a 5-star offensive tackle from Virginia. He's going to visit the weekend of the 25th to 27th. Obviously, Zach Rice would be a gap eraser. I mean, he is a run. I don't know if I'd put him quite on the level as Blake Fisher, but he's close. He's a top 50 recruit to me, easy. But he's, to me, more of a long shot. Now, but again, he's never been on campus.
Where's he headed? Do you think? I mean, or where's he projected to go?
It's all over. I mean, North Carolina, Ohio State, Bama. I mean, it's the
big boys.
Yeah, and then schools like that. It's not so much that he's projected to go anywhere. It's just that I don't think Notre Dame's a school is one of the schools trending for him. However, they're getting one of those 5 visits. That's
Fair.
huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's the kind of kid. He's from Lynchburg, Virginia. If you've never been to Lynchburg, Virginia, or Liberty University, it is out in the middle of nowhere. Now, Lynchburg's a nice city, but it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's in Western Virginia. He's the kind of kid that could come to Notre Dame and either be like, nope, there's no mountains, there's no tree, and just be like, this is not this isn't like home. Or he goes to Lynchburg Christian Academy. It's a very good school. I played against LCA back in high school, and it's a good academic school. He could come to Notre Dame and be like, oh man, this is a great place,
perfect fit. Yeah.
We just don't know. But right now, I'm not projecting that to be the case until he gets on campus. I'm not going to feel good about their chance with Zach Rice till he gets on campus. And we hear that they knocked it out of the park.
And that's not until the end of the month. Yeah.
Correct. So Jake Taylor, to me, is a more realistic option. Now, again, but that's what makes this month so important. If you're getting a kid on campus for an official visit, you got a puncher's chance. That's just the reality. That's like we can have a whole show on kids that visited Notre Dame with Notre Dame 4th or 5th on their list, and they ended up signing them. Yeah. Because that's what makes Notre Dame so unique. Is it's a different place, and some kids just I didn't think I was going to love it, but there's no other place for me.
Absolutely.
We've seen that time and time again. Jake Taylor strikes me as more of that kind of kid right now, and that's partly also because I know a little bit more about him than Zach Rice. But there is some things about Zach Rice that make me think maybe he could do it, but I'm not willing to push that yet. I need to see how things go for him when he gets on campus. And then after that, you look at the 18th, and there's a big offensive line weekend. We talked about Billy Schrouth. They're also going to have Joe Bruner on campus from Wisconsin. They're going to have Carson Hensman on campus. Emil Wagner's supposed to be on campus that weekend. I think personally he's going to commit to Ohio State before that, and I'm okay with that. But if you can get 2 of the 3 Wisconsin kids, especially if 2 of those 3 are Schrouth and Hensman, that's the makings of an elite class.
Okay.
To me, Carson Hensman is one of the top 4 or 5 interior offensive linemen in the entire class. I think Billy Schrouth, after his junior year, is neck and neck with Carson Hensman for the best offensive lineman in Wisconsin. Joe Bruner, for me, even though he's ranked higher than those other 2 kids by some of the services, for me is 3rd on that group. Those other 2 kids are a bit more athletic. Joe Bruner is a big, tough, long kid, but he's not the athlete those kids are. Okay. The athleticism, and everybody thought, hey, got to get 315. No, Notre Dame's offense is a zone offense, which means you need athleticism over size. Right? Now, if you get both, feet, a.k.a. Blake Fisher, that's great.
Right. Yeah, right.
But you need athleticism over size to execute what Notre Dame does. Okay. And to me, Schrouth and Hensman are absolute. If you get those 2 linemen to go with what you already have, we can have some questions about the tackles, who's the tackles, but just as far as 4 really excellent offensive line prospects, you've got 4 excellent offensive line prospects. It's going to be hard to find anybody in the country that's going to have a 4th guy, whoever you predict is Notre Dame's 4th guy, is as good as Notre Dame's 4th guy. If you can get those 2, then the difference between that being a top 5 offensive line class and Notre Dame having the best offensive line class is adding one of the tackles. If they can add one of the tackles to that group of 4, if they're able to do it, look, Billy Schrouth, I feel good about. Carson Hensman, Wisconsin and Iowa are major players there, right? So I'm not as confident in that one, although I do like where Notre Dame is at. But Schrouth and Hensman, if you get those 2 players, if you can then add Jake Taylor or Zach Rice, they're to me, I don't know if there's going to be a better offensive line class in the country. And that's something Notre Dame should be battling for every single year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to ask potentially an ignorant question, but it's more of a philosophy question when it comes to recruiting for the offensive line. Back when Harry Hiestand was here, we saw a lot of tackle recruitment, and then you turn them into interior guys, right? It was, you get the best, because generally in high school, you put the best offensive linemen out at tackle, and it is what it is. And then when they get to college, you can move them around or whatever. Do you see that same type of philosophy with the O-line recruiting now, or is it more position-specific recruiting?
No, it's more of a style. Jeff Quinn likes maulers. He likes wrestlers. Okay. And the problem is a lot of those guys are guards.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And that's my issue with what he's doing. I mean, you look at last year's class, Rocco's a guard, Coogan's an interior guy. Caleb Johnson, I think, could maybe play tackle, but he's got sort of a tackle body, but more of a guard mentality. I still think Blake Fisher could be a great tackle. I think he could be a Quentin Nelson type of guard. I mean, he could be that good of an interior player. Then you look at this year's class, and you look at, Joey Tenone is more of an interior player. Ty Chan's a tackle, but Carson Hensman an interior player. You look at Billy Schrouf's an interior player. Joe Bruner's more of an interior player. Jake Taylor and Zach Rice are tackles, and then they recently offered Ryan Baer, who I don't believe has a visit set up yet to Notre Dame. And my understanding is they're recruiting him a tackle, but he's not a tackle. He's a guard.
Yeah.
And at least not a tackle for a place like Notre Dame. So I think it's more of that style of play, getting those mauler types.
Okay.
He doesn't put as much emphasis on length as I think he should.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, yeah, we can nitpick about these guys playing. But the fact is if you get Schrouf and Hensman to go with those other two guys, yeah, I'll nitpick about who's going to play guard and all that. But the fact is they'd have 4 outstanding offensive linemen in the class.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, look, make it work.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You got 4 dudes. Make it work.
Right.
Okay. And I think the thing that helps him with that, too, is obviously Rock Blake has proven he can play tackle. Tosh Baker's basically if you really think about it, Tosh is essentially a freshman again because of the COVID year.
Right.
You can basically count Tosh Baker as a freshman.
Years. Yeah, right.
He's got 5 more.
He's got 5 more. You're right. Yeah.
So, you can look at it that way. And then, of course, Ty Chan is a tackle. So you could say, oh, hey, you know what? As long as some guys don't get hurt, Michael Carmody's playing tackle right now. Caleb Johnson, we think Ty, you could say, okay, you can get away with it and then focus more on tackles next year. Right. But the fact is that we can nitpick who's going to play where a little bit. And that's important. It's not, but look, I'd rather take a shot on a guy and trying to get Billy Schrouf to play tackle, who's an outstanding player, than to take a guy who's a tackle but not necessarily as talented as Billy Schrouf. That's kind of the way I look at it.
No, I got you.
That'd be a heck of a 4-man group. And then now you can say, hey, look, if you can close with Taylor or Rice, that Notre Dame's doing what they should do, which is because part of the deal with closing the gap is as you get better recruiting other positions, you can't take a step back in the positions that you've already been
good at. Yeah,
that's why tight end is. That's why I had such an issue with taking Jack Nichols early in the process of tight end, because Jack Nichols not a guy that a place like Notre Dame should be taken that early in the process.
Sure, he's an add-on at the end.
I don't any disrespect to the kid. He's a quality football player, and it seems like a great kid. But this isn't a nice contest. This is a talented football player contest. And so that they were able to recover, but I have some issues with how they're recruiting the 2023 tight end position. Are they going to just take a good football player early, or are they going to push for the best? And that's the concern. And the offensive line's a similar situation. They have to have a top 5 line class every year. You can't take a step back at the one position that everyone in the world would agree Notre Dame can recruit as well as anybody.
Agreed.
We can argue whether they can do that at quarterback, receiver, secondary, whatever. But there's no excuse not to recruit tight end and offensive line at an elite level. And that's why this offensive line class is so important, because if you can get a 4 to 5 man class this year of top players, then you can maybe take a smaller class next year of 3. But it's 3.
But they got to be elite dudes. Yeah, they got to be elite. Yeah,
and so to me, that's why it's good. And if you can knock it out of the park in June and maybe end the summer with Hensman and Schrouf, now you can focus even more of your attention on. Okay, we got Rice and Taylor that we're going to these are the 2 guys we're after, and everybody else thanks but no thanks. These are the 2 guys we're after. But then you start putting your emphasis on the 2023 kids like TJ Shanahan. And start talking about getting them in for fall visits during the season. And it ups your process with that class, which then gives you a better chance for 2023. So that's why it's so important on the offensive line. That's the twofold reason why it's important for them to have a knock it out of the park month of June on the offensive line.
Michael had a question that I know, and I'm breaking the rules by kind of cherry picking a question, but it goes along with what we're talking about. And I wanted to throw it up here. With the possibility of starting 2 freshmen on the O-line, do you think it will help O-line recruiting this year or hurt it? And I think that's a really good question, because most schools at Notre Dame's level are not starting freshmen, true freshmen on the offensive line. It is a position where you come in, you get bigger, you get stronger, you learn, etc., and you might start by your 3rd year. I mean, that's
or second if you're a stud like Quentin Nelson. And
correct. But, that's the normal transition for an offensive lineman at a place like Notre Dame. Does this hurt, like, a guy that's looking at Notre Dame like, wow, well, those 2 spots are going to be locked down for the next
3 more
years? Yeah.
I think I
agree with you. I think it helps. I want your opinion.
It's a very fair question, and I've been asked this question a lot. Like, I think it helps, because it's one of those things where you look at it and say, well, look, Jarrett Patterson's probably gone after this year. Josh Lugg's gone after this year. There's going to be 2 open spots, and Notre Dame has shown they have no problem playing a freshman.
Yeah.
So if you're Zach Rice and you're sitting there thinking, hey, look, man, they're talking to me about coming in starting a right tackle next year, and you have me and Blake Fisher on the edge together. I mean,
Yeah.
Good night, Now, Tosh Baker's going to have something to say about that, but, you don't need to necessarily inform him of that if you're Notre Dame and you're recruiting him, But, hey, look, what are we going to do with you and Blake Fisher on the edges for 3 years together or whatever, 2 years together? And then when Blake leaves to go to the NFL, you slide over to left tackle like we've done with other guys. I mean, look, Mike McGlinchey, Ronnie Stanley, 2 top 10 NFL draft picks as left tackles coming out of college. And they both started their careers for a year at right tackle, so you could talk to them about that way. So, no, I think it helps.
Okay.
I think the fact that they're going to lose at least 1, maybe 2 offensive linemen after this year, and the fact that Notre Dame is willing to play freshmen more than they have in the past.
How I would spin it, yeah, for sure.
And I don't think it's so much about a willingness as it's much, especially with Blake, as he's just that good.
Yeah.
And this is the thing we talked about at WSBT last night, Vince, is, I think the reason I'm not as concerned about them starting 2 freshmen on the offensive line as maybe I should be is because I don't think they're starting those freshmen because they don't have a choice. I just think Blake and Rocco were that good that it's like, well, hey, look, they outplayed those older guys. Now, there's some circumstances for it, but when it comes to Blake especially, the circumstances are a little different for Rocco just because we talked about moving guys around. But from the moment he stepped foot on campus, Blake Fisher just blew people away, which is how good he is.
Yeah.
And then he gets to spring practice, and he just same thing. He's like, I've literally had multiple people tell me, and these aren't coaches or Notre Dame coaches or current Notre Dame players. I've had people who really have no skin in the game. It doesn't affect them one way or the other. Tell me that when they were at practice this spring, that it was obvious that Blake Fisher was their best offensive lineman. Now, keep in mind, Jarrett Patterson wasn't there.
Sure.
Right?
But still.
But they're saying he's by far their best offensive lineman. I'm like, well, so-and-so not looking good? No, he looked good. He looked normal. Well, what about so-and-so? Oh, no, he was fine. It's just Blake's that good. So then you dig into what they mean, and it's not like – because they're not like, man, they're in trouble. This freshman's their best player. It's like, dude, this kid, Blake Fisher, is their best player. He's a top – I've had people talking about him being a top 10 NFL draft pick already. And I'm like, well, let's pump the brakes, but that's the kind of talent that he's flashed.
Sure.
So I think it helps, and hopefully that kind of bleeds to other positions. So, hey, maybe they might actually start playing young receivers moving forward. Who knows?
Pump the brakes. No.
Sorry, I know I got a little carried away there. I apologize.
Well, speaking of wide receivers, obviously, Notre Dame's done a good job of bringing in skill guys in the past. I mean, they have. They may not have played as quickly as maybe some of us would have wanted, but they brought him in. So what does it look like here in June for the rest of this offense and kind of rounding out this class?
So to me, that's the skill positions on offense are the ones where I have my biggest sort of question marks.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the quarterback position. I saw that there was a question about that. We'll get into that during the Q&A session, but they're off to a good start at running back. If Jadarian Price is the only running back they land in 2022, I'm good. Yeah. I mean, he's a good football player. You add him to the class that you had last year with Logan Diggs and Audric Estime, and then you had Chris Tyree the year before. You're rolling along at running back. You're doing good. But they are in a unique situation where a second running back makes sense numbers-wise. It's not an absolute must, but it makes sense numbers-wise. And there's 3 kids on the board that are just really outstanding football players. And then 2, for me, that are better. I'm higher on Dallin Hayden and Nicholas Singleton than I am on Gavin Sawchuk. But Gavin Sawchuk's still a really good football player. But to me, if you're able to add one of those 2 guys, then your backfield, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm trading Notre Dame's backfield with anybody. Just 1 through 5, and and because to me, especially like Dallin Hayden, and look, Ohio State's going to be tough to beat, but as I said before, Notre Dame has a much better chance there than a lot of people think. But he's a great fit for Notre Dame as a person. He's a great fit for Notre Dame academically, and he's a great fit for Notre Dame schematically. And I think he's the kind of kid that his ranking isn't going to blow you away, but we're going to look back on it in a few years and say, why was he ranked in the 200s? Why wasn't he considered a top 50 recruit? That's how I view him. And so to me, you add that kid with Jadarian Price and the backs you've had before, your running back depth chart is healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, healthy. And then you look at the receiving class. And so, you got 3 running backs coming on campus in June. You've got Dallin Hayden coming on the 11th to the 13th. You've got Nicholas Singleton coming on the 18th and the 20th. And then you got Sawchuk coming on the 25th to the 27th. And Jadarian Price will be there that weekend as well. To me, you got three cracks at this, right?
Yeah.
And you got to just get one of them to really have. I mean, again, that's a gap closing class. There's no doubt about it. And to me, that's a gap erasing class because I think Jadarian. You could argue that Jadarian Price is a gap closer in the other sense, in that he makes your depth chart better than what it was, and that's going to be the key. And so when I look at that's a gap erasing class if you can add Dallin Hayden or Nicholas Singleton to the deal. Then you look at receiver, that's where I'm a little less optimistic right now. You've got Amorian Walker already in the class, high ceiling, very low floor. And, he's kind of a boomer bust kind of guy. That's another way of putting it, right?
Sure.
You hope it works out, but there's a lot of work
needed
there.
There's a chance that it's not going to happen.
And here's the other problem. Del Alexander, during his time at Notre Dame, has not shown the ability to take a really raw kid and coach him up. He's taken kids with a lot of God-given talent, and by the time they're juniors and seniors, they step up and play well.
Sure.
But Amorian's a guy that needs a lot more work than your normal receiver. And you look at Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool was not a very fundamentally advanced wide receiver. Neither was Miles Boykin. They were just big and athletic. And Chase Claypool was a really poor route runner. And he basically admitted it without admitting it when they did that video where he came back last summer and was working out with Notre Dame's players. And he was like, man, if I could run routes like this in college, and he was, because of the stuff he had learned with the Steelers, he'd have like a rookie mini camp, and that was it.
Yeah, all right.
So
clearly coachable if done correctly.
Right. And it's just one of those things where when you look at it, you say, I don't know if Notre Dame is the greatest fit for Amorian with the way it's currently constructed.
Yeah.
Then you look at it and you say, I think Tom Loy has reported that at 247 Sports that Notre Dame does want to take Nicholas Anderson. I've had some conflicting reports on that myself, but I trust Tom. If he says that, then he's getting that from somewhere. Yeah. Tom doesn't make stuff up. That concerns me.
Yeah.
That concerns me because Nicholas Anderson is the polar opposite of Amorian Walker. Very low ceiling, higher floor because he's a very advanced route runner. And my fear is that instead of addressing your receiver coach problem, they're just going to go for guys that are more advanced. CJ Williams is that kind of way. Tobias Merriweather is that kind of way. But they're higher ceiling guys. They're more talented. Nicholas Anderson is that kind of guy as well, but he doesn't have the athleticism and the upside of those other guys. And so if you take him, you're either going to take 4 kids in the class or you're going to take only 3 and you're going to get one of Tobias or CJ Williams. And to me, that doesn't move the needle as much as it needs to because Amorian Walker and Nick Anderson are not gap closers at all. Yeah. Matter of fact, I'd argue that your number 2 and your number 3 in this class are in that scenario is below what your number 2 and your number 3 has been for several years. And that's concerning for me. Now, so you're sacrificing upside for a guy that's more ready-made. Yeah. And that's an indictment of your position coach. And the fact that they're not pushing for Xavion Bradshaw right now, huge red flag for me. Yeah. Giant red flag for me. And so that's my concern there. Now, if I'm wrong and they take 4 receivers and they take Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams and Nicholas Anderson, I can live with that because you got 2 studs. But then I have to ask, who's your after the catch guy? Who's your slot guy? Right. So there's some puzzling things happening in this 2022 receiver recruiting class that say what you're doing on the recruiting trail doesn't match what you say you're trying to do with your offense. So are you only switching to more of a RPO screen offense this year because it fits your personnel, but ultimately you want to get back to power forward football? Yeah, right. That's my concern. That is concerning. So, that is the one position in this whole operation that has me most concerned with. Now, there's some excellent players on the board. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my affinity for Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams is well known. But then you look at and say Tobias is 6'4", CJ's 6'2", 200. Nicholas Anderson 6'3", 6'4", Martin Walker 6'3", 6'4". They're all vertically oriented players.
Where's your inside guys? Yeah.
You've basically recruited Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool again.
Yeah.
Which, for me, great. But Notre Dame has already made the excuse of, well, we couldn't beat Clemson because we didn't have enough playmakers at receiver when you had Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool. And so my question is then why do you keep recruiting that kind of player? That's my only position where I'm scratching my head. The rest of the positions in June, running back, O-line, D-line, and that's the other thing is that, we didn't talk about the D-line a whole lot. Anthony Lucas, we'll get into that here in a second, but let's wrap up this receiver thing.
Okay.
I feel really good about where Notre Dame is across the board at positions that they're not already filled at. Okay. Receiver's the one that has me a little bit concerned.
I get that. No, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Now, we know there's going to be 22 guys on campus, but there's also going to be
before we go into the 2023 class. I wanted to kind of talk about this, and I left this out of the outline for you, Vince. That's why you're not talking about it yet.
That's okay.
There's some guys, to me, a big key to this month of June for the 2022 kids is Notre Dame has to get a couple players that I feel are game changers at important positions. Okay. And to me, it starts up front. Anthony Lucas is maybe the biggest must get on the board for Notre Dame.
Overall,
in my opinion, anywhere.
Okay.
Now he may not be the highest ranked kid. I'd have to go look in but he to me is a top 50 recruit. But to me, it's more about this. I like the future at the defensive tackle position. But once Jason Adamiola leaves, there's nobody like him on the roster. Anthony Lucas is Jason Adamiola with 2 more inches and 25 extra pounds coming out of high school. That's how I view him. He's as big as he's about as big as Jason Adamiola is now, weight-wise. And he's about 2 inches taller with longer arms. And you know how high I am on Jason Adamiola.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anthony Lucas with Gabriel Rubio and Aiden Keana ahead of him and Jacob Lacey ahead of him and guys like that. That gives Notre Dame a future defensive tackle rotation that is as good as anybody's.
Yep.
And Anthony Lucas would be the best of that bunch, in my opinion. And that's saying a lot because, I loved Gabriel Rubio. I loved Riley Mills. I loved Aiden Keana. I forgot to even mention Riley Mills when I was talking about it earlier. You give me a future and group of interior players that includes Riley Mills, Aiden Keana, Gabriel Rubio, and Anthony Lucas, and I'm like, look, the gap is erased at that position.
No gap. Yeah, right.
There is no gap. Notre Dame is as good as anybody in the country, and they're not that far behind a defensive tackle now. They've been behind. They haven't produced the elite players yet, but they're getting closer to from a recruiting standpoint. And I think we're going to see the gap close a little bit this year when we see Jason Adamiola and Riley Mills, get a chance to produce. We saw Kurt Hinish take a big jump forward last year. So, but you add a guy like Anthony Lucas, who what makes him unique too, Vince, is you talked earlier about linebackers in this defense. Well, Anthony Lucas is a 6'4" to 6'5", 280-plus pound. He's listed anywhere from like 275 to 285. He's a big kid. I think he's probably closer to 280, 285.
As a high school kid.
Yeah, but he's incredibly athletic for his size, in my opinion. His burst off the ball is exceptional. But he can not only dominate as a 3 technique, but he's got enough girth that you can, in certain looks, put him at the nose and just say penetrate, just kick that center's butt all game long. But he's also a guy that you can play on the edge in 3-down looks. I mean, he's a kid you can kick out as a 5 technique.
Sure.
And you watch his hands. I mean, Vince, there's plays where he's coming off the edge and linemen shoot their hands at him, and he does these like advanced, moves where he's just kicking their arms off of them. That's instinct and hand speed, instincts, just feel for the game.
Right, you refine that at the next level.
And he's been coached well, too, at the high school level. Now, as most juniors, there's room for improvement. But he's clearly been schooled. I mean, whoever's coaching him at the high school level, kudos to you because you've taught this kid some good moves. But he's still a pretty raw kid as a junior.
Sure.
But he's got, to me, the upside to be, he can do for Notre Dame against big-time teams what Christian Barrymore did against Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. What we saw guys in the past do against Notre Dame. You look at Clemson in 2018, what their D-line did to Notre Dame. He is that kind of player. He is an elite player from an upside standpoint. And he's close to that now. I mean, I don't hand out many 5-star grades, Vince. You know that. I'm very, very picky with 5 stars, especially for juniors. But Anthony Lucas is right on the cusp of that. And as his technique improves, that's the grade that right now is going to be the thing that kind of gets him to that next level. He's not very far from it. He's the kind of game changer, gap eraser that Notre Dame needs. And when you combine it with what they have in front of him, it completely changes your depth chart to where you're throwing a dude at teams throughout your whole 2 deep. So you're not recruiting those maybe undersized Kurt Heinisch, Howard Cross, really, kind of who are good football players who've served a role in what Notre Dame has
100%.
become.
100%.
But now you're attacking teams with guys that have motors and all that, but they're bigger, they're more athletic, they're more God-given talent. And I think that's the thing that we look at. And then there's a couple others on the board. Cyrus Moss is one. He's the kind of kid. Because the thing about Cyrus is Cyrus can play Viper. He could play will linebacker. You can invent a position for Cyrus Moss. He's that kind of athlete. And so he's another one that I look at. Tobias Merriweather is that kind of kid, in my opinion. There are some kids on the board now that if Xavier Nwankpa, if you can get a few of those guys, Jalen Sneed and Junior Tuialamaka at linebacker, that's the thing that really, so you can inch closer to those teams, or do you take like a pole vault and to close the gap? Those are those kind of guys. But to me, if I can only have one of them, if I can only have one of all those guys that I just mentioned, I'm taking Anthony Lucas for the reasons that I mentioned. Because if you can dominate right up the middle, I don't care who you have at the rest of your defensive spots. As long as they're good football players, you're going to be fine. If you can dominate teams right up the middle, and with Riley Mills, Aiden Kanaana, Gabriel Rubio, potentially Jason Onye, because we didn't talk about him. If he's allegedly up to 280 already, he's going to be inside. And then you add Anthony Lucas to that, the gap is erased. I'm going to have to get new shirts, gap erasers.
Gap erased.
Yeah.
It's like Back to the Future.
Gap gone. Erased. Exactly.
So the 23 class, though, there's going to be guys on campus for the 23 class.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one, Vince. So this isn't so much – the 23 class isn't so much about, get 5 or 6 commitments. I don't really care about that.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of kids going to be on campus, a lot of highly ranked guys that I know they're trying to get Dante Moore on campus. They're having a lot of good quarterbacks are working out. Braden Dorman's going to work out. I talked to Ricky Collins, said he's going to work out. Tad Hudson said he's going to work out. I don't know if Dante Moore's going to work out, but he's supposedly going to visit this summer. You've got some AJ Harris is supposed to be, who's a 5-star cornerback from Alabama who grew up a Notre Dame fan.
And these are the guys coming in on their own dime. They're just making their way through.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And so there's a lot. Drake Bowen visited yesterday. We have a story about him at irishbreakdown.com. He's a top 25 to 30 type of player in the 2023 class who's from Indiana. The level of talent that's coming in from the 2023 class is really impressive. And how well they do with that group. And again, I don't really care about commitments from 2023 kids. But if you can then ensure that those kids are going to come back in the fall and you can really knock it out of the park with a lot of those kids, secondary kids, linebackers, defensive linemen, hopefully they can get Keon Keeley on campus this summer. There's some really impressive kids that are going to be on campus. They're trying to get on campus in the 2023. And that only adds to it because now you're in a position where you can start stringing some of these big-time classes together.
Sure.
And that ultimately is the goal. That's the difference between maybe this 2022 class can be the key to a championship, but then when that class is gone, you take a little bit of a step back or you just
keep on going. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's where the 2023 class is going to come in.
And Notre Dame is still, and every other school as well, is they're playing catch up even with the 23 class because, those guys would have been on campus for camps and things the last couple, last summer, et cetera. So they're playing catch up with the 22 class big time, but then the 23 class as well. And so that this month is so important. It is so important for both of these classes. And then just to get Notre Dame back on its normal schedule of recruiting, because we all know it starts earlier and earlier every year, it feels like. So let me ask you this. What is your ideal June for Notre Dame? So we're going to fast forward a month. Where are we at? And you're feeling really good about it. Like we're going to do a podcast, that first week of July. We just celebrated July 4th. And we're going to do a podcast about Notre Dame's June and how excited you are about it. What just happened?
Okay, it's a great question. Number
Thank
one,
you.
I think they have added 2 of those Wisconsin linemen that we talked about. They've had at least those 2 guys.
Sure.
So you've got Carson Hensman, you got Billy Schrouth in the class. I think that would be a very, very, very successful June.
Yep.
And then, an elite June is you also get Jake
You had
Taylor
that tackle.
Price.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, the extra tackle.
Right. Anthony Lucas, maybe you don't have him in the class, but you are now his leader. You are now the team to beat for Anthony Lucas if you don't have him. You close the deal with Junior Tuihalamaka and Jalen Sneed. They're in the class. You close the deal with Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore. They're in the class. And ideally, you can come out of June with a safety. At the very least, if you don't get a safety, you are considered the leader for Sherrod Colville and or Xavier Nwankpa. I think if you can do that, I feel really good about that. And then that leaves you – the only thing left there is what do you do at the skill positions?
Sure.
That's if I feel better. So that one I don't have as much of specifics because I have more concerns there. But if I'm feeling better about where things stand with Notre Dame, let's say that they've convinced that they finally decided to get Xavier Bradshaw on campus. They got a commitment from Merriweather or Williams, or at least they're the leader for those guys, and you feel really good about it. Maybe I'm hearing from some birdies that those guys are silently committed, but they want to take some visits in the June. Then I'd feel good about it. If you can maybe knock it out of the park and get one of the running backs, especially if it's Dallin Hayden or Nicholas Singleton. I mean, to me, that's that knock it out of the park June.
Yeah.
But if you're going to miss, I hope that the misses are at running back and receiver, because I really feel like this defensive haul is more important than the offensive haul, because you have a little bit more of a, how do I say this?
You have more leeway.
A little bit more
on
of
offense.
There's a bigger margin for error there.
Right. There you go.
You have Xavier Watts, because you have Lorenzo Styles, because you have Deion Colsey, because you have Jaden Thomas, because you have the tight ends that you have, because you have the running backs that you have. It's not ideal. I'm still going to grade them low. I'm still going to ding them for it.
Sure.
But you can rescue yourself in 2023 more effectively if you miss there.
Makes sense.
If you miss in the secondary, if you miss at linebacker, if you don't get Anthony Lucas, if you fall short on the offensive line, I'm a lot more concerned about those positions moving forward than I am receiver.
Yeah.
I just am. And I also think receiver's a position where you can more effectively plug and play a grad transfer if you get into a tough spot.
Yeah.
I don't love the idea of grad transfers on the offensive line. I don't love them at linebacker. I don't love them at the defensive line. Secondary and receiver, and the reason I say that is because it's more of an individual position.
It is.
I agree. It is at some of those other spots.
Completely.
And so, I don't want Notre Dame to ever be in a position where they have to get a grad transfer.
Right.
But if I had to go get a receiver grad transfer, there's guys that you can get out there.
Sure.
I don't want to have to do that at the front seven, the offensive line. Those are the important ones. And so if that to me if that's what we're talking about, if those are the storylines coming out of June, then I'm feeling really good about where things stands. And if those are the storylines plus the offensive skill has taken a big jump forward, then now we're going to sit down and talk about, okay, Notre Dame is on the verge of signing a top 5 class.
Right.
And if they can then finish, that's the key, finish, meaning get those extra couple guys in the fall and then don't lose guys, right? Which is going to largely be determined by what you do on the field this year, which if your question about that, refer to yesterday's podcast.
I was going to say refer to yesterday.
No, I mean, and here at the end of the day, Vince, I'm more confident that Notre Dame right now is in position to finish with a strong June than I have been at other periods. And obviously the Junes are different because these are new, but I'm not even talking about this isn't the biggest June of Notre Dame, of Brian Kelly's tenure. This is the most important month stretch of recruiting of any month, whether it be the last
just because
month
of all the circumstances.
Day, all the circumstances plus it's beyond the circumstances. It's the caliber of player that you have on campus.
Yeah, they've done their work. They've done groundwork with all these guys, which is super important because we haven't seen that in the past.
And here's the deal. What's the one thing we've always ever said about Notre Dame? Notre Dame's coaches will say it. Other schools will say it. The one thing that gives Notre Dame a puncher's chance with kids is when they can get them on campus.
Absolutely.
And so my point is, you've done all this. Yes. Most of these kids have never been on campus. And the ones that have been on campus were on campus as freshmen and sophomores when you weren't paying a whole lot of attention to them.
Right.
But a lot of these kids have been on campus before.
Yep.
And so that is the thing, is like, that's where you look at it and you say, it's Jalen Sneed was in a good position with Notre Dame, and then he visited a month or two ago, and all of a sudden things started changing with him. Why? Because he got on campus. Same thing happened to Dallin Hayden. He got on campus. And that was on his own dime with no coaches talking to him. That's just him coming up and checking it out.
Right.
Now you get to do it this way, where he gets to see all the facility. Because the other thing is, when these kids visit on their own, they couldn't go through the locker room.
They can't go in. Yeah,
they can't go in the meeting rooms. They can't do those kind of things.
You can walk and see the Golden Dome. And you can look through the gate at Notre Dame Stadium and, see a little bit. But which is great. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can get a feel, but you can't. You don't see the inner sanctum
effect. And that's why I'm more confident now that Notre Dame can close. Now they need to go out and back up that confidence and finish. And I'm very confident it's going to happen on defense. Offense, I have a little bit more concerns, but the opportunity is there.
It is there.
And you look, you can hammer the staff and Dell this and Tommy that and Jeff Quinn that and McNulty that. But the fact of the matter is, the guys that they need to close this thing out are either on campus, going to be on campus this summer, or they're a phone call away, Xavier Bradshaw, from being on campus.
Right.
And so that's the thing, is you that's a great place to be going into June. And you can't ask for much more than that. Now it's about closing time, right?
Yep.
That's it.
All right, Brian, I'm going to let you handle the Q&A because I got to roll, brother. I got a lot going on.
You should have had lunch before we started the show.
Yeah, well, yeah. If only I had assistant coaches to do my bidding, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. But this is the last time.
I hired assistant coaches, but then they leave before we get to the Q&A part.
Yeah, well. That's fair. Yeah. Last time you're going to see this background. That's why I want to get all the work done today, because I don't want to come back in this building anytime soon. So everybody have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you hopefully with a different background tomorrow. Brian, good luck, sir.
Thanks, Vince. All right, so let's dive into questions here. Matt Romero has a question for us, so we're going to get into. Matt's question is, seems to me I'm seeing more highly ranked recruits, including Notre Dame, in their top schools, also visits. Would you attribute this to Notre Dame's recent success on the field or the coach's recruiting efforts? That's part one of his question. I think it's both. I think I attribute it to, obviously, the on-field success is great, but I think especially on defense, and this is to your second question, which is also, is one side of the ball out recruiting the other. I think the other part of that is the fact that we've seen Notre Dame have so much success on the field. Look, when you win, kids want to be a part of that, especially in football. Football, more than any other sport, in my opinion, at least the major sports, basketball, things like that, it's so much more of a team sport. There's still so much invested in winning. It's not just about the draft. With most kids, it's about, I want to be drafted high, but I want to win a championship. That still matters to a lot of kids. And I think the fact that Notre Dame's had the on-field success that they've had and the success in generating draft picks, those things go together, I think is why Notre Dame is in position to recruit a lot better than they have in recent years, and why, to your question, Matt, there are more – I don't want to see highly ranked, because I don't care as much about highly ranked, but there are a lot more highly ranked guys, but there's just a lot more talent coming on campus this summer than we've seen. All righty, let's get to some questions here. Jonathan says, I'm ready for an awesome month of recruiting news. I think we're going to get a good chunk of it. I definitely think we're going to see a lot of that. So, and by the way, before you leave, while the number's so high, before you leave, if you have to leave during the show, I understand, but make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the Irish Breakdown channel, and hit the notifications bell so you know when we're going to do shows. Like we're going to do a show tonight at 8:00. We're going to break down some Notre Dame positions. I'm not quite sure which one we're going to do yet. I got to go look at my notes, but we're going to talk some recruiting tonight. Tyler says, Sneed and Tuihalamaka at linebacker wraps up a great linebacker class. Need to hit on a corner and safety. Anthony Lucas at D-tackle was icing on the cake. See, Tyler, I don't view him as icing on the cake. I view him as a must. I view him as you have to get a guy like that at D-tackle to truly close the gap with your defensive line. And they're doing great at defensive end, and they've got some good defensive tackles, but he's the kind of guy that just takes your defensive tackle all to the next level. I don't view him as I don't think if you don't get him, it's not necessarily a big miss. As far as, you're not good there. It's a missed opportunity, in my opinion, to add a game changer to your front. And that, to me, is where it all starts. If you can dominate right up the middle, as we talked about earlier, you're gonna be a really great defense. And Tyler also says Cyrus Moss official the 18th too. We need to hit that out of the park. I agree. A lot of love for Cyrus Moss. Tom Balork. Okay, so Tom agrees with me. Anthony Lucas is a game changer, gap closer, whatever you want to call him. Defensively, we could be special with pressure up the middle and our heat from DN. Could cause some OC sleepless nights. And Tom, you're absolutely right. And that's why, even though he's not a need from a, gee, you don't have good players there already or your numbers are bad. When you have an opportunity to get a kid of that caliber, you have to do it. It's important to get that guy. Jay Clampin Investments. I thought Cyrus Moss was off the table. Nope, he is not off the table. All right. And then Tyler says, per Brian's channel, Notre Dame has a really good shot with him. He's a take regardless of number of defensive ends already committed. And they told Cyrus that the minute they got those other commitments. They said, look, you're still our guy. They told people in the recruiting, look, Cyrus Moss is still a take no matter what. There's no question about it. Mike Gardner says, Elson has done a great job thus far in his new role. Hopefully he will light a fire under some of the other coordinators when it comes to recruiting and player development. I'm not worried about the coordinators from a recruiting and player development standpoint. And I'm assuming you're referring to Tommy Rees there. I think Tommy Rees has done a pretty good job recruiting. I think the problem on the offensive side of the ball is some of the other coaches, not Tommy Rees. And so I think that's more of a bigger issue, and that's maybe where he can have some accountability there. All right, let's get to some questions here. Let's see what's next. We got Maddie K. Hey, Brian and Vince, I saw on 247 Sports Online that the D lineman Anthony Lucas is favored right now to go to Notre Dame. Thoughts on him and about big a talent he is, Maddie? I think we've addressed that. I don't know if I'd favor him to go to Notre Dame just yet. I think the visit's going to be an important part of that, but he is – okay, if I could put this into perspective, he is as big of a recruit as Jalen Smith wasn't linebacker, as Stephon Tuitt was, as Aaron Lynch was. I mean, that's how good I think Anthony Lucas is. Tyler asks, any changes to your thoughts on Angeli? While it's just a camp setting, I thought he showed some good zip on his throws. We'll see if he translates it to the field. I didn't see that. I saw the same video you did. I didn't see that. I don't see the ball jumping out of his hand. When I watch other top quarterbacks, I see that. I still don't see that with Steve. I think Steve's a good, solid football player. I graded him as a 3.5-star guy with a 4-star upside. He's a quality football player. He could be a little less, maybe a little less mobile version of Jack Cohn. And that's a good football player, but that's not an elite football player. He's not in the same category as Tyler Buckner. He's not in the same category as Drew Aller. He's not in the same category as guys that, they're looking at in the 2023 class, but he's a good football player. And my opinion hasn't changed on him. I don't think less of him. I think also the thing that keeps him a little bit down for me is his ball placement still isn't great. And that's something else that he continues to show, and I've seen at these camps. All right, Jay Clampin Investments asked, I'm sure this has been asked, top offensive player you want, top defensive player you want. And obviously, one player is not making or breaking an entire class. I mean, if you get Anthony Lucas, who's my top defensive player, but you strike out at corner and safety and all that, then it obviously it's not great. But if I could only ensure that Notre Dame gets one guy, so like I can wave a magic wand and say they're going to have to work for all those other guys, but you can guarantee that Notre Dame's going to get one guy on both sides of the ball. Who would that be? On defense, it would be Anthony Lucas, no question. And on offense, it would be Tobias Merriweather, probably. It would be where I'd go. Either him or Xavion Bradshaw. And, those would probably be – I'd come down to those two, but I'd probably go with Tobias Merriweather on that one. But it would be close. And you ask me that question tomorrow, I may change my mind, and it may be Xavion Bradshaw. But right now, today, it'd be Tobias Merriweather because I think his ceiling is higher. And I'm a ceiling guy. All right, Connor Patton says, based on what you've learned from following recruiting, what is your sense of football program at Morris Catholic High School, New Jersey? I'm not familiar with that football program, to be completely honest with you, Connor. So I don't really, I don't really have that. So, Jay Clampin Investments, I see your thing about the Cash App up. I'm not familiar with that. If you want to maybe hit me up with an email or a DM on Twitter and kind of explain that to me, I'm always up to hear about new ideas. So Coleman Smith says, does Notre Dame possibly end their O-line class with Shrouth and Hensman if they do not get Rice? Do they expand the board? So it's not just Rice. It's Rice and Jake Taylor is to me where the tackle board is at. If they don't get one of those two guys, I don't think I would expand the board unless it's another similar caliber player. I think if they're able to get a top tackle that maybe right now isn't interested in them or they haven't offered yet, that's fine. Like, I'm not going for Ryan Baer, for example. I don't know if I got Hensman and Shroud, if I'd go for George Fitzpatrick, who I don't think Notre Dame's not really pushing for right now, but like a guy that I really like because he is a lower floor, higher ceiling guy. I would just put my emphasis on next year. That's really what I would do. If I'm going to take a fifth lineman in this class, because 5 is not necessarily an ideal number because it puts you in a little tighter spot at some other places. I think 4 is you have to get 4. You can go to 5 if it's the right 5, but it'd have to be a Zach Rice or a Jake Taylor situation. But if they just get Shrouth and Hensman, that's a really good offensive line. That's a top 5-ish offensive line class, and I can live with that. And I'll nitpick a little bit about maybe I'd have liked another tackle, but Joey Tanona's played tackle as a sophomore. He was a good tackle. I actually thought he could be a right tackle before he moved inside. Now I love him inside. But he's a guy that could, if Michael Carmody can play right tackle, I think Joey Tanona could play right tackle if you needed him to. So I think Billy Shrouth doesn't necessarily have a right tackle mentality. He's kind of got that guard mindset, which I love. But he's a good athlete. He could maybe get some work and play tackle. So I'd have some nitpicks on a 4-man class that included Tanona, Chan, Shrouth, and Hensman. I'd have some nitpicks, but overall that class is going to get a very high grade from me. No question about it. 2164, don't worry. You can always come late. We'll still let you in. We may not answer your questions because I'm mad at you for coming in late. I'm just kidding. But obviously you'll be able to get caught up once things end. All right. Coleman Smith asks, Brian, who do you think has a higher upside, Mickey or Morrison? I know you love both. I think upside-wise, I'd probably go with Morrison because I think Morrison has a better body. I think athletically they're very similar. I think Jaden is a little bit quicker. I think Benjamin has more speed. But I think the reason that Jaden also is a little bit more instinctive right now. But I think Benjamin he's got a longer body, he's got more vertical speed. I think those are areas where I'd give Benjamin the edge on that at that position. But I think Benjamin is more of an outside guy. I think Jaden could end up being a really, really, really good slot corner. And I mean really good slot corner. And there's always a need for that, especially as offenses continue to evolve. Okay, another one from Coleman Smith. Do y'all think Sonny Styles will stay at safety when he gets to college? He seems very big for the safety position. No, he'll be a rover. And I think most teams are already telling him that, to be honest with you. Jonathan says, this episode is like bacon candy. I've never had bacon candy, but I all of a sudden just got really hungry. And I'm going to text my wife here in a second and ask her to make bacon for lunch. I don't know what it's going to go with, but now all of a sudden I want bacon. All righty. Notre Dame 2164, just to show I was just kidding about not answering your questions. If we can get our secondary where it needs to be, I would put our defense on par or better than Georgia's. I already think Notre Dame already has a better defense than Georgia's, with all due respect. I mean, at least it's been better on the field in recent years. I think Georgia gets a lot of guys that are ranked high that aren't necessarily great football players. I also think they get a lot of guys that are ranked high, but they're that's who they are. There's not the ceilings. I think Georgia's gotten better athletes in the secondary in most years, but I think Notre Dame's already has a better front seven than Georgia. But to your point, if the secondary gets there, it's definitely better than Georgia. There's no question about it. Jay agrees with me. He says, my surprise wish commit would be Lucas at defensive tackle, game changer. I absolutely agree. Kenny Moore says, I don't think the relationship is there between Rice and Notre Dame where it is with Bama and North Carolina. I would agree with that. Kenny. And that's why I'm not as confident that a visit could knock it out. Because Kenny, as you know, and we've talked about this before, and it's something that people that follow recruiting like relationship is always important from a coaching recruit standpoint, but it's even more so when it comes to the offensive line. There's no question about it. AJ asks, if Notre Dame were to finish with your hypothetical top 3 class, how important do you view Notre Dame's results on the field in 2021 in order to keep that class? In other words, how important is 10-plus Ws? I think it's very important. And it's not like they're going to lose 4 or 5 guys, but it's kind of like you could lose 1 or 2. Let's say hypothetically that Notre Dame goes 9-4, and one of those losses like a really bad, just a butt whooping. And Texas surprises everybody and wins the Big 12. would I be a little concerned about Texas maybe stealing an Anthony Lucas if they were to get him, for example? Yeah, I would. So, yes, I think another 10-plus win season and then avoiding the bad losses, especially the season-ending bad losses, is something you have to try to avoid. But I do think that you have to show that you're still continuing on that positive trajectory. And a 9-4 or worse season would eliminate a lot of that. But I'm confident they would do that. Look, I have my concerns with this staff, and I've been critical of them. But the criticism is you're not doing what you need to do to win a national title. It's not you're not doing what you need to do to not be 8-5. I'm not as concerned about that. All right, Liam Gaming says it seems like if teams like Bama, Georgia, at all see a recruiter who's looking at Notre Dame, Stanford, Northwestern, UVA, say, forget it, this kid wants to go to school. No, that's not the case. Maybe with Georgia, I don't like Kirby Smart very much. I think I'll keep my opinion on that, but he's a different breed. I don't think Nick Saban has any problem with kids who want to go to class, and he's shown that in the past. Doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily push you to hard degrees, but they're not going to fight you on it. KMA Preston, saw Caleb Evans visiting today. Do you think that increases our odds with him? And do you think Notre Dame needs a corner from the portal, or do they just really love Evans' talent? So I did some digging on that last part, Preston. And from what I'm told is they love their cornerback depth chart. Everybody that they wanted to step up, they thought Cam Hart did a great job. Clarence Lewis got better. Tariq had a big offseason. The reason that they're going after Caleb Evans is simply he's just too good to say no to. That's really it. And that's why they're recruiting him. I think that could also hurt them because I don't think they're going to guarantee him a starting job. They're going to make him earn it. Whereas at Texas and Missouri, which are Notre Dame's two biggest competitors at this time, the pathway to starting is going to be a little bit easier. But if they can convince him on, that fit and that familiarity with that defense, I think they'll have a shot. So the fact that he's visiting, he's already been to Texas. The fact that he's visiting Notre Dame, they certainly have a shot. It's going to be today. I'm also told he may still be on campus tomorrow, but I'm going to do some digging tonight, see how things are going. But I think they have a shot, but I'm not quite as confident as I was heading into this visit as I was a couple weeks ago before Texas offered, because he's from Texas. And so you obviously got some positive vibes there. Tyler asks, or actually asks and says, does Mike Elson overseeing the recruiting operation give you more optimism that Notre Dame will knock the June visits out of the park? Yes, it does. Because all the change that he's implemented since becoming recruiting coordinator have put them in position to finish strong. And I think they'll be more organized in this offseason. I think the visits will be more organized, making sure the kids are feeling the love. It's going to be more organized. So yes, I'm much more confident. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm more confident, but Mike Elson being in charge of the recruiting operation is certainly one of them. Matty K, 55. I really feel like this class has a huge chance at a top 5 class because they're so close to guys like Rice at tackle and Lucas at D-line and linebacker stacked that they finish on these guys. I agree. Christian Porter says, what is Devin Moore able to do at his unofficial visit at Bama in Florida that he can't do at his official Notre Dame visit? Well, one of the big things is just the length of time that he's going to be on campus. So on an unofficial visit, essentially, you can do all the things that you normally do. You can meet with academics. You can sit down and watch meetings. You can talk football. You can go on facility tours. They just can't pay for anything. So they, I think you can provide like a meal, but like I'm not even 100% sure on that. I know we could at the Division III, but I'm not sure how it works at Division I. But you can't have kids staying on campus. You can't have them. You can't take them out to a nice. If kids on campus, you can take them out to Ruth's Chris for all you care. I mean, that's legal. You're allowed to do that. You can't do that on an unofficial visit. You obviously can't pay for their way. That's really the big difference. But it's about the length of time is really what it's about in regards to that. Liam Gaming says, how does scholarships work if a guy plays 2 sports? Well, relative to football, basically, if a guy plays 2 sports and he's on scholarship for one of those sports, he has to be on scholarship for football. I don't believe that you can have a guy on a baseball scholarship and have him play football. And I think the reason for that is because Miami used to do that a lot, and they push back on that. Like I believe, could be wrong on this, but I believe Santana Moss is actually on a track scholarship at Miami. But so they've done it to where like the big sports like football that has more players, if you're going to play both sports, you have to be on a football scholarship. I believe is the rule. I can look into that, but I believe that's the rule. Chief Brody, thoughts on why tickets to game versus Toledo are currently more expensive than tickets versus UNC weather? No, it's because it's the first game. And there's going to be a lot of people trying to get back for the first game. It's the first home game of the season. I think that's the reason why. And it's supply and demand, right? Are there some people that maybe don't want to come because later in the year it's cold? I'm sure there's something to that, but I think it's more about just the diehards. I want to be at that first game. It's been a long time. I haven't been to a game in a while. I want to be at that first game. I think that's really what it's about. B Straw, who's the one recruit that isn't visiting in June that you wish would be making the trip to campus? Xavier Bradshaw. Easy answer. I think that's one where he would be on campus if they wanted him to be. They have not set that visit up as far as I know, and that's a mistake in my opinion. I think we talked a little bit about this earlier. I think the current recruiting strategy at receiver is concerning to me. The fact that they have not pushed for Xavier Bradshaw yet is concerning for me. Unless there's some red flag we don't know about, but I have not been told that there's a red flag. It's just they don't like him as much as other guys, and I think that's a mistake. Richard Robinson, great show as always. Thank you, Richard. Think Snead is best linebacker prospect I've seen. Big, strong, fast. Do they get him? Well, I don't think he's all that big. He's only about 6'1.5", 6'2", 210, but he's got very long arms. He's more long than he is big, but very strong, very fast, very athletic player. If I had to make a prediction today, I'd feel really good about putting a prediction in for Notre Dame and Jalen Snead. Yes, and I think it could happen. I think it could happen soon from the time he visits. No question about it. Omar Austin, if Jake Taylor commits to will Notre Dame take any more tackles? Would Rice still be a take? Rice would still be a take if there's a fifth spot left. I don't know if Notre Dame would or should take Zach Rice if let's say they get Hensman and Shrouth the weekend of the 18th, right? And then let's say Taylor takes all his visits, and then June 22nd he commits to Notre Dame after his other visits. Would you then take him, and would you then take Zach Rice also? I don't know if the numbers make up that way. And honestly, the other positions are so good that Zach Rice is a heck of a player, but I don't know if I would take him as the sixth guy. I don't know if I look at him the same way I do like Cyrus Moss and Anthony Lucas. Ethan, this is a great question. How many gap closers in the next couple of classes do we need to close the gap? I don't think it's so much as a number as it's a position. I think Notre Dame needs to get a gap closer up the middle. That's why I think Anthony Lucas is so important. I think linebacker's a position where it's needed. But is it one? Is it two? I just think you need at least a guy there. I think they need to continue to close the gap in the secondary as a whole. Is it one guy? Is it, yes, a guy like Xavier Walkba can certainly do that. And I think you need another skill guy. I think that's really where it's at as far as when what I'm referring to is we're talking about the higher level gap closer, right? We're talking about the Anthony Lucas types, the Xavier Nwankpa types, the Tobias Merriweather types. I think that's it. And then of course, quarterback. That's to me the biggest one. And I've argued this before. I really don't think Notre Dame is as far away from being a championship program as a lot of people think. I think the quarterback difference has really been the biggest one. I think they've had skill players that can compete with anybody. I think their defense has played as well as anybody in the country the last 2-3 years. To me, it's about quarterback. And I think there's been some coaching issues, but for me, it's about quarterback. That's the biggest position. And, Tyler Buckner was a great step, but to me in 2023, they've got to get another big time quarterback. Now, it doesn't have to be like Dante Moore is my top quarterback, right? It just hands down, he's my top quarterback. But it doesn't have to just be that kind of guy. It could also be a guy like Ricky Collins, who isn't as highly ranked right now because he's kind of raw, but he's got a tremendous upside. It could also be a guy like that, but quarterback is where they really have to close the gap for sure. Absolutely. Maddie K asks, also, Brian, isn't Notre Dame close to getting a guard? I know we show a lot of love to the tackles, but I'm not familiar with the guard centers we're recruiting. Well, the interior guys they're recruiting right now are the top ones are Billy Shrouth and Carson Hensman, who we talked about. Those are the top two guys that are on the board. I think Joe Bruner's more of a guard, but Notre Dame is recruiting him at tackle, which I don't think he's a tackle. If he's playing tackle, then Notre Dame's going to have some issues protecting the passer when they play against the top teams on the country. But to me, those are the two guys. Ryan Baer, I'm still trying to figure out where they're recruiting him at this point in time. I don't know what position he's going to play. The Tech Reviewer, here's another quarterback we forgot about. Kent Graham had a good long career as a backup in the NFL. Yeah, he was a backup at Notre Dame too until he transferred. Jonathan says, since there will be so many recruits on campus, what are some ways the staff can balance being able to attend to everyone while still making them feel unique? I think number one is making sure that you have a small number of kids at a certain position. So, for example, if you look at, let's pull up this visit list here. So let's look at the 18th and the 20th. There's going to be that's the biggest weekend so far, but there's one quarterback, one running back, one receiver, 2 tight ends that are already committed. You have 4 offensive linemen, could end up being down to 3. You have 1 defensive lineman, 2 linebackers, although 1 may not end up visiting, and then you have 3 guys in the secondary. So there's small enough numbers at each position that you can spend a lot of individual time with those players. And I think that's the thing. You got to get away from bringing in 5 receivers in one visit, and or 4 running backs or 7 offensive linemen. You got to spread those guys out over the visits. And I think that's where you can say, hey, look, you've got 20 kids on campus, but there's only 2 kids at each position. Okay, you're in a good position there to say, hey, we're going to spend a lot of individual time with you. So yeah, that's the best way to do it. It's just make sure there's balance at the classes. And then if there's a kid you really want to show a lot of love to, bring him in a smaller weekend. And I think we're seeing Notre Dame do that too. Corey Dickerson asked, hey, Brian, what way are we trending with safety? I know we're recruiting Pope and Luttrell. Who else are we in on at the position? So Luttrell is a 2023 kid. So he's just a sophomore right now. So I would not put him on there. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Xavier Wongpa, obviously, is a safety they're in on. Sherrod Colville from Virginia is the guy that they're in on. You mentioned Jake Pope. KJ Winston's another one. I like Jaden Bellamy at corner or at safety, and he's an interesting one. With Jaden Bellamy, if they get Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore, let's say hypothetically, do you then say, hey, Jaden, we'd still like to recruit you, but we'd like to recruit you as a safety? I would. I actually like his upside a lot better there. DMC0911, what happened with the recruitment of Kamari Rogers? He just wasn't interested in Notre Dame. I think the staff did everything they could with that kid. I just think at the end of the day, he wanted to go to a football school. I think that's really all it boils down to it. And just wasn't interested. Old Grim, what would happen for future years if Notre Dame makes the playoff again but loses badly again? I think it would what would happen for the future is it would just be the same story that it is now. They're going to continue to not get those top players in a lot of instances. But look, they're still going to get there. And the reality is most teams, when they get there, they get their butt kicked if they get there at all. So Notre Dame isn't unique in that regards. It's just Notre Dame gets more attention for it, right? Oklahoma gets smacked a lot. Michigan State got smacked when they got there. Florida State got smacked in their only visit to the college football playoff. Washington got smacked in their only visit to the college football playoff. Most teams get smacked when they get there if your name's not Clemson, Ohio State, or Alabama. It's just, LSU had that one unique year, but if LSU makes a playoff this year, they're going to get smacked. So that's just the way it goes. It's a good question. John Rich says, without naming names, are there any current commits who may be less solid than we'd like? Also, guys, hit the like button if you haven't. The guys at Irish Breakdown deserve it. I appreciate that very much, John. But honestly, to answer your first question, I don't actually have a lot of concerns with guys in the class right now. I think that right now, the kids that are in the class are pretty solid on Notre Dame. Now, here's where it could change. Kids that committed Notre Dame without visiting. If they visit Notre Dame and maybe it's not what they expected, then you could see that change. But I don't see it changing. I think the kids in the class right now are as solid as you can be with anyone right now. And there's no guarantees with anybody, but I feel really good about them keeping this core group together at this point in time. And Jay says 2023 linebackers, Bowen, who just visited, Tackett Curtis. I watched that kid last night for the first time. Holy moly, that kid is athletic. Trey Edwards and Tamir Robinson, all very talented players. And I would throw Sonny Styles into that group as well. And I think he would be my biggest must get at that position along with Drake Bowen. Jay also says, better chance at landing an elite defensive haul this class, this cycle that can shut down an elite offense, then vice versa with an offensive recruiting standpoint this cycle, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think they have a better chance at having an elite defensive haul. I think I'll actually be surprised if they don't have a top 5 defensive class. I'll be very surprised if that doesn't happen. Now, to get there, you need to close out in the secondary, what we talked about. You need to make sure that you finish off with Tuihalamaka and Snead. You need to add, one more top-level defensive lineman, and then you're as good as anybody. But they're already close. I mean, to me, they got one of the 5 best defensive hauls right now because they've got a bigger group than most teams have. But to keep that level, you need to finish the way that we talked about. Benjamin Morrison's part of that. You need to get one of the top safeties we talked about. Get the 2 linebackers. And if you get Anthony Lucas, I mean, that's a heck of a call. And then if you can add Devin Moore into that, I mean, you're putting that secondary or that defensive haul against anybody. Now, I don't want that to just be the case. Notre Dame has to be better on offense because at the end of the day, I mean, we've talked about this a million times. You have to be able to score points. I don't care how good your defense is. You have to score points. You're not going to beat Alabama 14-10. You have to be able to score points. Joseph Steve, why is Bradshaw not being recruited more, and are there more slot-type players on the board? No clue, and no, sadly. I don't understand it. I've been told they're just still trying to learn more about him. To me, it sounds like they're slow playing him until they find out what happens with the bigger guys, and I think that's a mistake. I think it just shows me that yes, it's good that they're adjusting the offense for 2021 because it fits the personnel, but it tells me that they don't plan to keep that they're going to go back to the big boy football at receiver, the power forwards at receiver moving forward. All right, last few questions here, and then we're going to wrap up. So Maddie K, Florida State recently came out with new white out uniforms, and I'm almost positive they will wear them week 1 versus Notre Dame. Did you see them, Brian? I did not. If you could shoot me the tweet or something like that, I would appreciate that, but I didn't see that. I don't pay a lot of attention to Florida State stuff, but I'd be curious to see what they're going to do. So they're talking about wearing white at home against Notre Dame. That'd be very interesting. DBZ, coach, is it possible if Austin has another injury, we can start Davis, Keys, and Lindsey at wide receiver? I would enjoy that lineup. It's possible. I'd be curious kind of who the boundary guy would be. Maybe put Lindsey there, but yeah, I mean, it's possible. Do some stuff with Michael Mayer in the boundary. It's certainly possible. But whether or not they get to that point, I think what we would see is we'd see more 2 tight end stuff. I think if that happened, we would see more of Deion Colsey, hopefully, at that point in time. But, yeah, I think we could see some alignments with that, no question. And then Rob asked, and this is the last question, and then we'll wrap up. Do you think they will use Lorenzo Styles and Xavier Watts? I hope so. I think they'll use at least one of them. Will they use 2 of them? It's a good question. I don't know. Let me go back and see if there's any questions that we missed. I think we got them all. So, and that's it. So that's going to be it for today's recruiting show. So I'm going to have another show tonight at 8 o'clock. Got to figure out which position we're going to break down, but we're going to break down some recruits tonight. We're going to take a look at some of the players on the board. We're going to try to continue knocking those out before these visits really get hot and heavy. Maybe we'll watch some offensive linemen tonight. We talked a lot about offensive line today. So, let's talk about the offensive lineman on the board. So I think that's what we're going to do. So we'll look at Billy Schrouth, we'll look at Carson Hensman, we'll look at Jake Taylor, we'll look at Zach Rice, and then we'll look at the kids that are on the that are already in the class. So we'll start off with Jerry Tanona and Ty Chan, dive into those guys, and then we'll talk some big boy football. So we've talked a lot of skill guys lately when we've done the breakdowns, and I know some I know Jonathan's going to be excited about that. So let's talk big boy football tonight. All right, let's talk about the offensive linemen. Go over the board there, talk about what I like, how that class could shape up, who can play where, and those type of things, and we'll check it out. So, again, everybody, appreciate you being part of the show today. Make sure you hit the like button before you take off. Subscribe to Irish Breakdown. Hit the notification bell, which tells you when we have shows going. Also, down below, you'll see a link to our merchandise store, so you can get stuff like this. You can get the Gap Closer hoodie. We have hats. We have mug. We have all types of cool stuff there, I believe. And also have a link to Patreon down below. And, of course, signing up for our free daily newsletter at irishbreakdown.com. So, Kenny Moore, thank you. I appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. The show is a lot of fun. We're also working out. D-Rock, I saw this too. The numbers were definitely way higher today. So, people want to talk recruiting. So, I love it. But appreciate you being part of it. And as D-Rock says, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. So, for all y'all that are going to be with me tonight for the show, I'll talk to you a little bit. For everybody else, have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.